Well, good morning again, everybody. My name is Dr. Juhanna Rogers. I'm the Vice President for Racial Equity and Social Impact here at CenterState CEO. I will be moderating today's discussion with our esteemed panelists. However, before we get started, this work wouldn't be possible without the support of Berkshire Bank. And so I am excited to have representatives from Berkshire on with us today. And I would like to hand it over to Heidi Higgins, who is going to just offer us a few thoughts. Heidi?
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the Racial Equity and Social Impact panel, the discussion series on inclusive communications, representation matters. It's our pleasure to be here today as a sponsor and to support the important work all of us must do to create communications programs which are truly inclusive and equitable. At Berkshire Bank, we're committed to supporting partners like CenterState CEO, who like us understand that our most important investment is the one we make in each other, that it's the only through lifting each other up that we can make a better future together. Berkshire Bank has made it a priority to be the leading socially responsible community bank. To deliver on that vision, Berkshire is on its own journey to ensure that its workforce reflects the communities in which it operates, that its employees feel that they are valued and can reach their full potential, and that it leverages its core business to improve the access and affordability of financial solutions to support economic growth of underrepresented populations and communities. For over 175 years, Berkshire has been there to help its customers and communities because we believe empowering the success of those who we serve drives our own success. For instance, we're already reinvesting in our communities at a rate nearly 70% higher than the industry average. In October 2021, we announced an exciting new fintech partnership that's allowing us to use artificial intelligence to deliver more inclusive lending options for consumers by going beyond the FICO score and considering up to 1,600 data points when deciding creditworthiness. The result is more accessible and more affordable credit that unlocks upward mobility and ensures our neighbors and communities continue to thrive. We're doing our own part to learn and ensure our own marketing and communications are inclusive because people respond to messages in different ways and have different backgrounds. And we've also committed to lending and investing $5 billion over the next 3 years to help transform local communities, which is an increase of about 60%. We call it our best community comeback, and it focuses on 4 key areas: fueling small businesses, community financing and philanthropy, financial access and empowerment, and funding environmental sustainability. We believe every community deserves a comeback. Again, Berkshire Bank is honored to sponsor this virtual event today, and I'm excited to hear from this talented group of women. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. When we started this work almost 2 years ago, and I came into this role, we wanted to ensure that we were having conversations at multiple levels to engage multiple stakeholders across the community, and that the conversations around racial equity and social impact and DEI were accessible. And so Berkshire Bank sponsoring the panel and this work is really allowing us to do that in a thoughtful way. This panel is pretty special because it's happening during the celebration of Black History Month. And in honor of that, one of the goals of Black History Month is to help ensure that as a community, as a country, that we are telling more inclusive stories, that we are demonstrating and illustrating in the work across genres, across industry, across institutions, that we're talking about the presence of African-American, Black American peoples, specifically this month, but we're doing it all the time. And this month specifically is just a time to highlight it. And so when we thought about what could we talk about during Black History Month, the notion of inclusive storytelling inclusive representation really rose to the top for us. This is a panel that we've been working on and talking about over a year. And so the day is finally here, and I am excited to get the conversation started. We have our esteemed panelists, and we intentionally asked these individuals to participate on the panel because they represent different areas of communication, different career paths they've taken to get here, but the work that they have done and are doing currently in the roles that they are in, and they will talk more about them, has been about building more inclusive practices, have been challenging the status quo in regards to communications or marketing or PR or branding. And we thought, let's get an inclusive group of individuals with a diverse way of experience across the sector of communications to talk about how they're doing this work. So without further ado, we're going to get our panel started. How it's going to work, I'm going to introduce each panelist. They'll have about 10 minutes to share their reflections, their thoughts, and then we're going to have a moderated Q&A. So that means get your pencils, Post-it notes out. If you are someone that wants to engage in the chat, we ask you to do that, put your questions there. And we have the session until 10:30 because we want to make sure that you, the audience, have an opportunity to engage with these amazing individuals and can learn from their experiences and their knowledge. So don't be shy about that. Put your information in the chat, and when the time comes, definitely be prepared to come off of mute and lend your voice to this space. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Stephanie Crockett. She is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Mower, a fiercely independent integrated marketing, advertising, and public relations agency. If you didn't know, Mower is right here in Syracuse, but they have professional staff across the US. Stephanie's responsibilities include growth, planning, culture, and leading all external activities of the agency. She specializes in multi-channel, enterprise-level integrated marketing communications with a foundation that is based on data-driven insight. She is a wonderful, wonderful human being, an active advocate in our community, and I'm quite sure in many others. And I've had the pleasure of working alongside of her in some capacity with the United Way when we were on the board together. And so without much more delay, Stephanie, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Johanna. I appreciate the introduction, and I so appreciate participating in this panel and being invited to have this really important discussion with all of you. So I'm going to share some slides. As Johanna said, I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer at Mower. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us as an agency, I want to give you just a little bit of information as a little bit of background. So as we said, we're fiercely independent. We have been around for almost 54 years, and we have about 150 employees. We are an integrated agency, which means that we're doing everything from advertising to public relations, building websites, and a variety of other aspects in the marketing and communications world. We are located in multiple offices. We have locations all over basically everything east of the Mississippi. We have 10 different locations, but we do have employees outside of even these individual spaces, in part so that we can bring in the most diverse and best quality talent that we possibly can. Again, those disciplines represent everything from marketing, media planning and buying, digital marketing, all things in the paid, in the social media and search engine optimization and marketing space, as well as a significant focus on reputation management, crisis communications, and public relations. So what I'm going to talk to you all about today is from the perspective of communications relative to advertising and public relations, and how you're seeing and representing inclusive communications in your advertising communications and in the things that you're really focusing on as you're promoting your own companies and brands. So before I get to that, I did want to share a little bit about Mower. and the kind of efforts that we've done as an organization. Over the last several years, we've all, thankfully, while it came out of not positive circumstances in our communities, as companies and as individuals, we've all been focusing much more on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and hopefully belonging in our companies. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about the things that Mower has been doing, not to share just about us, but to talk about the fact that it goes beyond just hiring. Hiring is a critical component of bringing diversity and inclusiveness into your workforce, but there are a lot of different ways as organizations we can be looking at how we're implementing and thinking about inclusion across those various areas. So this is a summary of efforts. It's not entirely comprehensive. There are things outside of that, but I wanted to share this again, a little bit of a glimpse into what us as an organization are doing. And that starts with the diversity hiring goal, establishing an affirmative action plan for our hiring. I'm proud to say that while we have a long way to go, we have doubled the number of diverse employees over the last 12 months. As I mentioned before, we've done that through very specific and deliberate hiring, looking for the best talent that we can find. So we've gone outside our kind of geographies and the places where we have offices to ensure that we can bring that talent in, because we know that we're better as an organization by having representation across a variety of different individuals, and the work that we produce for our clients is better as a result. We have a specific spending goals for vendors that we work with, not only for our own efforts, so let's say our office supplies, those kind of things. But also we are imposing and really focusing on spending goals for our clients. For example, when we're buying advertising for them, we want to have at least a goal specifically around the number of minority or women-owned businesses where we are buying media from those folks that actually own those media outlets. We have published our DE&I policy. We create knowledge posts or blog posts and content on our website. We now have Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Juneteenth as holidays. And not only are we taking those as holidays, but we have them, or giving our employees the day off, so to speak. But MLK Jr. Day is a day of service for us, as is Juneteenth. We take those opportunities to partner with organizations like 100 Black Men and educate our employees and do training, and are doing things in the community to support these particular efforts. We've conducted and completed for all of our employees unconscious bias training. All of our employees participated in the 21-day equity challenge. We've also done inclusive communication training, which you'll see in the next few slides that I'm going to share with you. The 4A's is our industry association. It's the American Association of Advertising, and those MAPE interns are specifically for minority intern program. We have several of those on staff. We also are in the process right now of our entire senior leadership team completing workforce enlightenment certification. We have a partnership with 100 Black Men of New York, which we've done for several years. We're their pro bono agency. Again, we partner with them on speaking gigs and various things, but we're also providing pro bono services for them, as well as many other organizations in the communities in which we live, work, and play. And then we also are celebrating and recognizing National Heritage Months throughout the year. So these are all things that we've done as an organization. And I think really are the take on what you'll hear a lot from us today is it's not so much as just simply when an occasion is coming up that Mower is showing up around diversity and our support for diversity by putting a black box in our social channels. But we said to ourselves, we really need to back this up. We do not want to check boxes. And that for us as an organization was really important to think about all of the ways that we're behaving and acting as a company, and the ways that we can help improve and impose that within the relationships we have with our clients as well. So checking boxes is not enough. Not only is that the way that we look at it for our own organization, but certainly as the way that we advise for our clients. And that needs to make sense for all of you when it comes to thinking about what you're doing to represent inclusiveness in your communications on the advertising side of the table. It's not enough to simply include diverse models in your ads, right? We've seen this. We've seen this done poorly. We've seen brands that say, oh, I'm good because there's a Black person, or here's an Asian individual. What we're doing is very often companies are neglecting cultural differences that their diverse customer segments represent. Right? So when you're thinking about that segmentation and you're thinking about how to represent inclusivity, it can't just be about pictures, right? It needs to be more about the way that you're communicating, how you're representing families. And that isn't necessarily only about racial inclusivity, right? It's also about representing families from different cultures, representing families that look different, whether or not that's different gender identities, it's different same sex. It could be families like mine, whereas I'm married and I don't have any children. And when you think about families, very often you're representing mom and dad, 2 kids, right? So how are we being inclusive and respectful of all of those cultural differences and representing people so they can see themselves in your communications? Untargeted generic messaging fail to deliver the value in terms of the minds of those audiences. They need to feel like they're seeing and hearing and feeling themselves in your advertising. The diverse and inclusive content requires deep insight from a cross-discipline functional team. If you do not have representation of those individuals on your team, it's nearly impossible for you to be able to actually truly represent those folks in your advertising and communications. Now, if you're a smaller business, you don't have the opportunity to hire a full team that really represents all of the diverse nature of the customers that you serve and the inclusivity that you want to show, I would recommend looking at an advisory council and having that be representative of the different facets of the community that you want to see, that we want to show inclusively in our communication, and say, hey, this is an ad I'm thinking about putting out. Here's a Facebook post. Is this feeling inclusive to you? It's okay to not know exactly what's right and wrong. It's not okay to guess and do it poorly, right? It's better to ask the questions and get the assistance. And most importantly, it's be part of the conversation. You want to provide opportunities to hear from your customers, to hear from those advisors. Look for guidance from groups that are on the ground and doing the work. Talking to somebody like Dr. Rogers and saying, I need your help. We're not doing this well, and I'd love to get your assistance. There's so much opportunity out there to learn and be trained on, but you have to ask for the help. So I wanted to focus just a little bit on a few key things regarding language, because I know the other panelists will talk a bit more about public relations and how we're seeing things in imagery. Language has the ability to build relationships and forge connections, but it's equally liable for creating barriers and impacting someone's sense of belonging. So I'll just share a few slides around language, and this comes from a training that we had and was really, really important for us as communicators and the way we're interacting internally, as well as the way that we are communicating through our clients' marketing to their customers. Use of gender language. Very often, I do this all the time. I have in the past, sending an email out to 3 females that I work with. I started with, hey, ladies. I've changed that. I now say, hey, friends, right? To more inclusive terms, friends, folks, colleagues, everywhere. Not everybody identifies in cisgender norms. So they look at that and say, I'm not, hey, guys, hey, ladies. I want something that feels more inclusive. Use of language that's derogatory towards people with mental illness, insane, crazy, hysterical. Those can be real triggers and feel very insensitive. Pivot to overwhelming, intense, exhausting, which, as we know, are really the feelings that we're having, right? There are ways within your communications to use alt text and social context. I can share more about this offline. I didn't want to get into too much of the technical details, but an easy way to practice that all social channel managers should adopt is making sure that you're incorporating alt text and social content that really reflects that in the back end from an inclusivity perspective. Use of inclusive imagery. There are ways that you can find this through diverse resources, like Project Show Us on Getty is a great resource. So that's a resource for stock photography. Videos for inclusion. Every single video that we share should have captions. And that is for, of course, ADA compliance and those who have learning disabilities. And then person-centered language. There's ways to communicate about this. Instead of homeless person, at-risk communities, it's people experiencing homelessness, underfunded communities. One of the best things to do is to reach out to those groups, understand how they want to be communicated about and with, and use that language. Because sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And my mother used to say that to me a lot when I was younger, but it was really more about my tone of voice than it was about the way that I was using language. And that was people living with disabilities as opposed to disabled people. So you want to really be people first versus identity first language. These seem like nuances, right? These seems like semantics, but it's really important from an inclusive perspective that we're thinking about how we're using that language. And again, research the identity you're communicating to, how that community likes to be addressed. Research is the first step. Ask questions. Don't assume that you know the best way to proceed. We know that there are several campaigns over time that have missed the mark. These are just a couple of examples because these are some obvious ones. I believe my other panelists will be showing some as well, but we've seen this in the past, right? So where we look at before and after, dark skin versus light skin, the perfect body, Victoria's Secret. We all know that is not what we all look like, right? So really being much more inclusive and thinking about that. And it isn't until these brands screwed up that they then got a significant amount of backlash and then they improved. Have they done the work first to realize that when you look at a Black man and a white woman and saying white is coming is not the right way to communicate about your PlayStation? Or to put a sweatshirt on a young Black man that says coolest monkey in the jungle. Those are so, like, to look at that, you think to yourself, how could this possibly happen? Well-intentioned people that are making big mistakes because they aren't taking the time to have an advisory board to really think through that team of people who can really be mindful of those inclusive communications and the impact that may have. That's all I have for you to share this morning. I'm excited to talk more, and I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Rogers.
Oh my goodness. I'm over here taking notes. Hopefully folks are keeping up in the chat because, I mean, just even ending on that point, Stephanie, I'm like, oh.
I know, it's like painful for me to even share some of those slides because they're so terrible, but yeah.
Those are real examples. Those are real examples of campaigns that were put out in nationally and some internationally. So thank you for showing, and I think your points about language first is a really, really critical one. So I'm excited to circle back, and hopefully folks are keeping points listed and we can engage in dialogue. Next up, we have Nikita Jamkowski, who is CEO and owner of Belisai. We went over this yesterday. Belisai Communications. I've had the pleasure of working alongside Nikita when she was working with Visit Syracuse. And so I've gotten to know her a bit and see her career just soar. She's an inspiration to me and a lot of other folks. But a little bit more about her. She started her professional career as a television news reporter, delivering live daily news coverage on ABC, Fox, and CBS affiliates throughout New York State, as well as in Maine. She is a graduate of the University, which is a bachelor, which she earned a Bachelor of Arts with a concentration in English and Communication. She serves on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the New York State Travel and Tourism Industry Association. She is the immediate past president of the Public Relations Society of America for Central New York. And now she is leading her own full service public relations communications firm with a particular focus on travel and tourism and entertainment. And so, Nikita, thank you for the work that you do. And she's right here in Syracuse, along with Stephanie. And so we have some brilliant minds and stars among us, and Nikita is one of them. And so without much more delay, Nikita, tell us what you're thinking about inclusive communications.
Good morning, Juhanna. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the intro. Yes, I've started my own Belisai Communications, and but what I want to talk about this morning is a little bit of my background with diversity and inclusion in my previous lives. My first slide, it's about my insight on diversity and communication coming from the broadcast mediums as radio and television, news, and more recently, the tourism industry. Okay, next slide. When I see or I hear bias coded language in news, I think of these three emojis: see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. A lot of times we turn a blind eye, or we don't want to believe that it's actually out there. I mean, I first heard these terms when I was in college at Tuskegee University, an historically Black university. My journalism professor, a white man, Dr. Clark, yes, Tuskegee had professors from all over the world of every race and color, but Dr. Clark taught us about coded language in news articles. Next slide, please. The racial code words appeal to deep-seated stereotypes of groups that are perceived as threatening, but they differ from the naked racial terms in that they don't emphasize biology. Terms like inner city and urban thug have been widely used and adopted to refer to Black people, but they've also been used by prominent figures to refer to high crime and poor work ethic in minorities, particularly African Americans. The next term used will be illegal alien, but now it's been upgraded to illegal immigrant. It's supposed to describe someone who migrates to the US without legal authority, but it's in fact used to describe a particular group of people, Latinos in particular Mexicans, even though many unauthorized immigrants can and do come from places outside of Latin America. Next slide, please. The portrayal of minority groups in mainstream media can have an unequal impact on how they are viewed by the general public. In the 18 years since 9/11, the American Muslim community has borne the brunt of negative media portrayals, from cable news to Hollywood movies. And of all the minority groups analyzed, researchers found that Muslims were by far the most negatively portrayed minority in the American media today. Next slide, please. Diversity in media matters because it brings attention to the underrepresented communities and it gives them a voice. By failing to reflect the diversified structures of societies, some media outlets feed into the divisive rhetoric. When I was in the news, I was that voice in the newsroom explaining why we don't use certain terms, or making sure that when we put out a description of a wanted individual, we included the race of all of the individuals wanted, not just the wanted Black man. From my experience, most of my news colleagues, they tried to be fair and unbiased, and it was not racially fueled or motivated, but it was more so inspired by ignorance. And having someone seated where scripts are written or decisions are being made on coverage on certain stories, I can tell you that it does make a difference. Next slide, please. The majority of the TV newsroom employees in the United States in 2020 were white, with African-American staff and Hispanic and Latino employees making up less than 25% of that total. A survey projected that the share of the Hispanic and Latino employees would increase slightly in 2021, but the forecasted percentage remained under 13%. We've come a long way with representation in the newsroom, but we have more reporters of colors, but we could use more general managers and the news directors of various Black backgrounds. Now let's switch over to tourism. The next slide. I applaud the tourism industry, especially in New York State. The industry as a whole gets it. It's gay, it's straight, disabilities, multiple races. Just look at the tourism leaders of New York State. I love New York. They are a clear reflection of diversity, and it shows in the communication in their marketing. The New York State tourism website even has a dedicated section that provides detailed information to travelers with disabilities. And I've worked closely with I Love New York and witnessed them encourage diversity and inclusion to tourism in regions across the state. And I've done this with them around the world. Diversity is essential to the future of tourism. Next slide, please. To build more just, equitable, and sustainable futures. The Tourism Academy and the tourism industry must engage in all forms of diversity to respond to a rapidly changing world. So if you go to the next slide, it shows us that tourism brings in big bucks. Prior to the pandemic, international travelers brought in over $180 billion. But by 2020, the pandemic came, that dropped to $38 billion. And it is projected to surpass pre-pandemic numbers as early as next year. So things are looking hopeful. It's actually turning around right now. According to the New York Times, Black travelers, particularly those in the United States, Canada, and Britain and Ireland, are keenly interested in how destinations and travel service providers approach diversity and have indicated that it does have an influence on their travel making decisions. In a survey of over 4,000 Black leisure travelers, 54% of them said that they were more likely to visit a destination if they saw Black representation in travel and advertising. In Britain and Ireland, 42% echoed that same sentiment, as well as in Canada with a number of 40%. Black Americans, to put it in perspective, spent an estimated $109 billion on leisure travel in 2019. Hispanic travelers spent over 113.9 billion on domestic leisure travel the same year, accounting for 13% of all domestic leisure travel that year. When they travel, Hispanic travelers outspend non-Hispanic travelers by an average of $300 and are more likely to travel in larger groups. Now, if you go to the next slide, this kind of shows what I was just talking about as far as the numbers. This chart represents billions of dollars. The contribution of Chinese travelers in global tourism ranked first in the world. In 2019, the Chinese tourists spent about $254.6 billion while traveling abroad. So if you think about that, that's a lot of money, which is why most of the tourism industry professionals know these statistics and go as far as putting money behind training in their industry and other industry professionals. They strategically target diverse travelers because they see the value. Now, the question is, do you?
Thank you, Nikita. I was thinking, I put it into the chat that the examples you provided with the news and coded language and even, talking about travel and tourism as industry examples of how you can challenge the status quo, but also use data-driven decision-making. So your examples on just spending and images of what's happening across New York State, but also internationally with various groups is a powerful one. And so hopefully folks can make connections between, the industry that you all are in and what is happening, and if there are standards for such practices. And so those are just 2 points to kind of noodle on while we move to our third panelist. Aleesha, how are you this morning? I'm excited to have you as part of our panel today. One, Aleesha Smalls-Worthington is a national, I might even say international name when it comes to doing this work and doing it in a way that's inclusive and representative of diverse communities. And when we were put in touch, I was so excited because I've followed a lot of her work and heard a lot about her and the work that she's doing across industry around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we're happy to have her on this panel today as someone to talk about branding and getting it right, right? And so Aleesha, she is a trailblazer in marketing and interactive branding for more than 20 years. Her creative, innovative concepts and strategies focus on delivering spot-on results for Black-owned startups. So this is another great example of her work. Scotch Porter is the company that she's working with currently, and she's further elevating the multi-purpose men's wellness brand. Her expertise in web development, she's an influencer marketing, interactive social media, advertising, and promotion specialist, and her skills there allows her to explore the world of new media platforms with traditional sensibilities. That basically means she is helping people innovate and challenging the status quo in those areas in a way that's delivering. Prior to her work with Scotch Porter, she held senior positions at Iconics Brand Group and Rock Nation, which is affiliated with a company run by Jay-Z, where she's uncovered new digital territories for large global brands and elite celebrity superstars. And so, Aleesha, thank you for making the time today to be with us here in Central New York and offer a bit more of a global perspective on what's happening in the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Good morning, everyone. I know it's early. Hopefully you've all had your coffee and tea. I'm a tea girl. I haven't had my Earl Grey this morning, but I'm super excited about chatting with you all. First off, I'm super excited about being here with you all. As the title says above my snapshot of a bio, it's been a heck of a ride. I've been blessed for the last 21 years or so to work in multiple industries, including entertainment, fashion, and fast forward now, I currently work for a CPG brand. I'm a Black-owned brand called Scotch Porter. What I'm going to illustrate in my presentation is, as we are a Black-owned business, sort of in the space, which is predominantly more general market focused when it comes to products, sort of how I would love to illustrate how Scotch Porter was born out of the sheer necessity in the marketplace, and just sort of express like our founders' philosophy, our mission, and how we are focused on servicing this underserved set of consumers. So first off, our founder, his name is Calvin Qualis, founded the brand in 2015. He actually worked in finance, and one day in Newark, New Jersey, got off the train and noticed this brownstone, and said to himself, it would be great for this to be an actual barbershop. And so his mom, when he was younger, actually owned a barbershop and beauty salon. And he noticed how grooming basically gave folks a new pep in their step, right? They would come in kind of feeling down on themselves and sort of walk out, pop their collar, and just sort of be transformed. And so that stuck with him. And he really just stuck a pin in understanding that grooming had the ability to really transform the way a person looked and the way they felt. That being said, when he opened his barbershop, it was a five-chair shop in Newark, New Jersey. He noticed a recurring issue when it came to men with dry, frizzy hair and beards. Not a chemist at all by trade, but kind of went home and became this kitchen chemist, working with botanicals and different natural ingredients. And from there, he started to arm the barbers with the products to have them leverage it sort of on their clients. Immediately, he noticed that the products were actually working, and really leveraged the barbershop to be like an incubation ground to test out various products. And so launched 2 products late 2015, early 2016. And within a year, word spread organically. He was doing, I always say, influencer marketing before influencer marketing was the new black, just arming people with the products and saying, hey, you know, share your honest opinion online. And within the first year, after launching a website, did $1 million and realized, wow, I really have something special here. As you can imagine, that continued to grow, and the collection continued to be focused on this, what we call cross-cultural men's sort of positioning. What we realize internally is that men's grooming is more than just a green juice, right? Just like beauty is more than lipstick, men's grooming is more than a green juice and a haircut. And so that wellness-centered approach is something that we're rooted in. And when we say cross-cultural, you know, the product over-indexes from a usage standpoint amongst African-American men, Hispanic men, because it was born in a barbershop in Newark, New Jersey. And that has predominantly been the base that has supported the brand and really helped to drive like that groundswell. But our founder, when he developed the brand, really the ideas and concepts were born out of need state. And when we say need state, how do these products address kinky, curly, coily, wavy hair on your head, your beards? And that was really sort of what the foundation of the brand being developed was rooted in. As it's continued to grow, and from a social currency standpoint, for sure, we started to see sort of the rise of the communications being between men of color. From a BIPOC standpoint, you know, servicing this consumer who felt like he couldn't go in store and find products that actually delivered the value props on his needs, right? So there are specific needs when it comes to hair hydration, beard hydration, even at times skin, depending on the elements that you're faced with every day. And so making sure that we're really grooming him from the inside out is something that's a part of our mission. Our mission statement is to arm men with the tools needed to live their best lives. And that doesn't only surround lotions and potions, as we like to say. And so in a lot of our communications, we're really, really honing in on wellness, just to help edutain him, as we like to say, right? Educate him and entertain him at the same time, so that he's aware that his total wellness is super important. And it also, by leaning into it, will help him really achieve his grooming goals. You know, a lot of times guys will reach out to our CX team, our customer service team, and say, hey, my beard isn't really growing here, there, you know, it's patchy, I'm dealing with, you know, tangles, etc. And a lot of folks don't really realize that a lot of that starts internally, right? Gut health. How much, you know, water are you drinking? Like, how are you really caring for yourself? And so really leaning into that wellness-centered sort of epicenter is something that we're dedicated to. We also expanded into retail in the height of the pandemic, which was interesting and fun, right? Because you go from being primarily a direct-to-consumer brand to now in-store, right? So you're competing with a lot of legacy brands like the Doves or, you know, the Cremos, some of the larger players, you know, the Harrys and the Dollar Shave Clubs, right? And so really being able to establish our footprint in market, providing him with access, we always like to say meeting him where he is, was super mission critical in terms of really allowing the brand to grow, to make sure that we are on the ground where he is. And so we actually will be announcing tomorrow, so you guys get the skinny before it happens, that we're launching at CVS. So we'll be in over 2,200 CVS retail doors, which is super exciting because we know that drug is absolutely a chain that he interacts in when it comes to things like his deodorants, et cetera. And so by spreading that reach, we of course get our products in more hands of consumers. We are actually a clean brand as well. Forgot to mention that a slide ago. And when we say clean, not just like the buzzword clean, right? Non-toxic or natural. A lot of people don't realize not everything natural is healthy. Talc is natural. And if everyone remembers that huge Johnson & Johnson lawsuit, right? Like baby powder and talc, it's natural, but it also can be harmful to you. And so we really take pride in on our no list when it comes to ingredients. We have over 1,400 ingredients that we do not use in our products. And so when we say we're clean, we're clean. When we say we're vegan, right? And so that really was a part of our founder's sort of mission and approach to the brand, because his philosophy was that we shouldn't have to use products that have chemicals in them equivalent to bleach or dish detergent, right? You should be able to access non-toxic, healthy products that are affordable and at your reach. And so we're super excited about our retail expansion and really look forward to arming him with the products that he needs when he's in market. A little bit about the Scotch Porter guy. Along with having a core base of over 75% of our gents sort of in our pool purchasing our product, there are also about 25% of women who are part of our audience, right? She's in market, usually a decision maker in a household in terms of, hey, this is what you can use for your hair, you know, this is what you can use for your beard. When it comes to things like gift giving seasons, you know, dad and grad moments, or the holidays, or even birthdays, you know, she's really leaned into Scotch Porter being like a product of choice to provide him with. What we like to say is the Scotch Porter guy is like the hometown hero. He's the guy who walks in a barbershop and everybody's like, hey, where have you been, right? And so he's there, he's marching to the beat of his own drum. He's really into like his family, his friends, and he really wants to be the best version of himself by tapping into multiple levels of different goals that he has, whether it's surrounding fitness, whether it's wellness, whether it's anything that he wants to be health conscious about, mental health, sexual wellness. And so as we speak to him through our social channels, especially, we're integrating a lot of content when it comes to holistically looking at his wellness and making sure that financial health, mental health, spiritual health are a part of our overall messaging. A few fun facts about the Scotch Porter consumer. We have seen over 433% growth in revenue since we've launched in 2015. And so we've been double digits growth ever since we sort of launched the brand online. And now that we've expanded at retail, it really helps allow us to scale and reach this consumer. As you can see below, 48% repeat purchase rate. This is super important. And for those of you who aren't in this world, when it comes to repeat purchase rate, especially on a website, as we call it, direct to consumer, it's really about building that stickiness and having that consumer come back. because as what we call share of shelf, right? Think about how many products you have in your bathroom. Think about how many products you have in your dresser. Every time you select a product, you are making an intentional choice about how it fits in your overall arsenal. And so for us to have such a high repeat purchase rate, it shows that not only are our products delivering on the value props that they offer up, but also too that we are a permanent part of his overall arsenal of grooming and wellness products. When we talk about speaking to him, social media has been a #1 sort of currency for us. And also too, just that validation from a review standpoint. We have over 22,000 5-star reviews. This is him raising his hand and saying, you know what, Scotch Porter really helped me achieve my goals, whether it's through hair care, beard care, face care, right? Really making sure that our products are not only talking about it, but being about it. And what I love about our products, not only are they affordable, but when we talk about the clean positioning, we really are offering him up products that not only does he feel good about using, but they also are tapping into ingredient profiles that aren't just the norms. So as an example, our hair care products include things like white willow bark and kale protein, right? And so when you think about the men's grooming lane and beauty as a whole, beauty when it comes to women's beauty has been super progressive in terms of like ingredient story. But on the men's grooming end, it's slowly but surely getting there. But the ingredient profiles tend to be a lot more simpler, right? Like the aloes or the shea butters, you know, things that are a little bit more narrow. And so we've been really intentional about looking at what products are in market to help over deliver on things like scalp health, you know, irritation. So we're not just focused on cleansing the hair, but how is it also delivering on the scalp and the follicles? And so him socializing how these products really work for him has been golden for us. And so we always talk about that social currency and making sure that we're reaching him, because he in turn will now advocate on how the brand actually works and how he appreciates sort of what we're building and appreciates being a part of what we call the Scotch Porter family. We've also been recognized by a lot of the core platforms when it comes to just men's focus. So whether it's the GQs of the world, the Esquires, the Ask Men. And why I like to highlight these is because predominantly those platforms usually lean into more general market brands. And so, you know, I like to highlight these awards because it's important to show that brands like Scotch Porter are a part of this editorial currency, right? It not only helps us reach new audiences, but it also shows that we are developing products based on need state, even though we are a Black-owned brand. Because a lot of the times, because you're a Black-owned brand, the question then arises, hey, is this only for Black people? And that's not the case. If you have a needs state that our product speaks to, kinky, coily, curly, wavy, straight hair, our products pretty much can be leveraged and used by everyone. This month, just going into a few spotlights from when it comes to marketing, you know, as we expanded at retail and post George Floyd's unfortunate situation, you know, we started to get a lot of visibility across platforms that before predominantly didn't highlight us. And when I say us, not only BIPOC founders, Black-owned founders, but also to the consumers and our products. And so we've seen a rise in retailers really putting their money where their mouth is in terms of spotlighting individuals who have brands and that speak to this consumer set. And so in the center right there, you'll see our founder who's spotlighted this month by Amazon. And as I mentioned here, representation is great, but diversification is also too like key, right? We want to be able to sit at the same table, right? And I always say, you want a seat at the table, but you don't want to be on the plate, right? And so we want to be around that table with other like-minded brands, whether they're Black-owned, BIPOC-owned in general, or even general market brands, being recognized by the way our products work, not necessarily being recognized just because we are a Black founded brand. Target also spotlighted our founder in a Bring Home Support commercial with other BIPOC founders. We also participated in events like CultureCon. We also worked with Amazon Prime on launching the Without Remorse movie, which was an awesome activation. And the reason I like to highlight these is because it's all about opportunity, right? And opportunity exists across various platforms, right? So even being a Black-owned brand, when it comes to the level of expectation around where you're seeing our products, right? We should be able to sit in the same communication pipelines that other general market brands do as well. And so we've been able to really continue to see traction across, as you see here, things like Vogue, the GQs of the world, the Manuals, Refinery 29, right? A lot of those platforms are stepping up and saying, hey, you know what? We didn't think twice about you guys, and we should have. Let's provide visibility to our consumers, and let's continue to do so, right? Let's really be honest and focused on honoring and sort of highlighting that representation that is super important, even internally within their own four walls. And so even to hear Stephanie speak about what Mower is doing internally, I would also say I've seen retail brands stepping up, like the Targets, the Walmarts, et cetera, of the world. I've seen editorial platforms step up, like the Vogues and the Refinery 29s and the Complexes of the world, really to highlight brands and drive a more broader stroke, and sort of being so straight and narrow and only spotlighting sort of the brands who are paying the bills from an advertising standpoint, or the ones that check the box because they're known and they've been around for a million years. We have something to offer, and I'm super proud of what we've been able to craft. A few slides just to highlight some of our products. We currently manufacture beard care products. We actually launched a beard mask this past holiday, and is launching at Target in 2 weeks, really focused on innovation. That's why I like to highlight that. This beard health kit that's on the left-hand side, it was actually the first time we stepped into an ingestible product. And so that's when we speak to internal and external wellness. We launched a superfood supplement that has biotin and iris sea moss in it. So when we talk about really helping him to tap into his total wellness, we're starting to go inward as well, literally, with our product assortment. We also have hair care. What's interesting about our hair care, it is formulated for textured hair. A lot of times textured hair, kinky, coily, curly, wavy hair, there are just nuances that are different, and at times need different levels of moisturization, hydration, and different levels of ingredients to actually provide definition. And so we're really focused on getting our hair care out there, because a lot of the textured hair care individuals to date haven't had products in the men's aisle per se, and have been tapping into a lot of the natural women's hair care brands just because of the lack of availability of these types of products. And so we're taking a big bet on hair care. That's why I wanted to spotlight that a little more deeply. We also have our face care products, our body care products. We have an anti-odor wipe that, as we like to say, is for all the sensitive areas. And as I highlighted a second ago, that superfood supplement, which is currently sold individually, as well as in our beard health kit. And we also launched fragrance. What I like to say, all of our fragrances are magical. It was so interesting when we launched this. It was during the height of the pandemic, and we tapped into language talking about transporting yourself, right? We all are within our four walls, but we know that fragrance just has a way of making you feel like you're somewhere other than the walls that you've been looking at during the pandemic. And so we were super proud of sort of the fragrance launch and how fragrance continues to grow and scale. And when you think about diversity, if you look at the stats, it's honestly depressing when it comes to understanding like how many BIPOC or even Black-owned brands have a fragrance presence. It basically isn't there. And so we're all about self-care being for the win. I'm super proud to not only be a part of a brand that I've been with on the ground, as I like to say, from a pebble to a mountain. I've always been afforded the opportunity, knock wood to date, to work with individuals like Jay-Z for 16 years, or Iconics brand group that own 33 plus brands, including Peanuts, Badgie Mishka, London Fog. I've always been able to be a critical part of the company's mission and understanding like not all consumers are one size fit all. And we need to be spoken to differently. And the first place to even get that messaging out from a diverse standpoint digitally, it's a no-brainer, right? So being intentional about social currency, being intentional about the language used. I know I'm really just tapping back into what the other two panelists have said, but it's really critical in how you approach consumers, and the love language that we use. Love language isn't only for romantic relationships, right? And so at Scotch Porter, I'm really laser focused on ensuring that our love language is applicable to all of our target market consumers, and being sure that we, as I like to say, bromance him in a way that speaks to him, and really keep that dialogue open from a two-way conversation standpoint, and not just being like, this is our brand and this is how it should make you feel, rather than this is our brand and tell us how it makes you feel. And so thank you for having me.
Thank you, Aleesha. That was powerful. I know I want to spotlight and bring up all our panelists. And, you know, I've been sharing my thoughts in the chat, but I loved from where Stephanie left off with the examples of product lines that have gotten it wrong, to moving through what you presented, Nikita, with how as a professional in the industry, you've been in the rooms and you've had the training from Tuskegee and being able to advocate and challenge the norms in various areas as news and PR, as a professional, and now leading it with your own company, to Aleesha, where you left us, and taking us through an intimate description of how a brand has developed from need, from a cultural needs perspective, and has grown. And what I picked up from what you shared is that, you know, you started with, the founder started with what he knew, saw an opportunity, but also how unfortunate incidents such as George Floyd has challenged platforms and industries to broaden their perspective and include the work of Black founded companies, right? And I know one of the conversations we have, Michelle Brooks Rowlands that's here, I'm looking through Nan Eaton, all of the folks that are on the line here in Central New York. I know there are many folks that are trying to figure out, how do we get this right? How do we do this better? And I think each of the examples you all provided is giving us that. And so I just want to open it back up with this question to each of you. What does it take to do this work courageously? Like, you provided the examples, which are great, but what has been maybe a challenge or something you've had to overcome in order to get this moving in the right direction? Like, Stephanie, when you were sharing all of the things that Mower was doing, my first thought was like, oh, did they have some of this going on already? Or did in the last 2 years, they figure all this out and got it started?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So I would say we didn't just start it the last 2 years, right? We had some things underway. But to be perfectly candid, we weren't really being deliberate about it as much as we needed to be, right? I think that that's one of the things that people feel almost really uncomfortable when they're talking about diversity, is that you have to be deliberate, and it can't just be like, we're hoping that we're going to do this, and we're trying our best. But the reality is, when it comes to creating a more diverse workforce, when it comes to you know, deciding that we need to spend in certain areas and ensure that that's represented, we have to hold ourselves accountable to that. And that has to be the people who are in charge. In our case, it happens to be a senior leadership team that is all white. And that's a challenge for us. So we continue to work on, like, being more deliberate about when we're looking at senior leaders, specifically going out and trying to bring that diversity in. And that's something that I think, again, can feel really uncomfortable. We're very fortunate that we don't have any challenges internally to somebody saying, no, we shouldn't do that, right? We know that we are not going to sacrifice any quality. I mentioned before, one of our big areas was really needing to make sure that our workforce reflects a more diverse population. In order to do that, we had to be comfortable with saying, I'm not going to be able to find all the talent I need that I would normally bring in Syracuse. I just simply don't have the resources here. We've reached out to UMU, we've reached out to other areas. Some of the work that we're doing is so specific. So we said, let's open it up. We'll hire in markets where we don't have individuals. That means setting us up from a tax perspective in a new state to bring new employees in. well worth it for us to make sure that we're getting the team that we need to have. So I think that part of it is just making sure that you're making plans, you're holding yourself accountable, you're putting specific measures in place. So it isn't this sort of like, we want to be diverse, full stop, right? It needs to be really specific. And we also knew that we didn't know everything. We reached out to individuals from our industry organizations, to other multicultural agencies, to people like yourselves. I mean, we do a lot of work, as you know, I'm very involved in United Way. We did training there. So we said, we want to bring that 21-day equity challenge into Mower. So just bringing all of that, I think, and again, asking the questions and recognizing what we don't know, and that we have to be okay with not being aware. And I would say, you know, there's some people that are like, but we're so welcoming and lovely. I'm like, yeah, but everybody looks like me. So how welcoming really is that? Are people really feeling that they belong? And so that, I think, is really for us the next stage. We're bringing individuals in, we're trying to make these changes. How are we sure that we're now creating an environment of belonging and welcome? That I think is probably where we continue to know that we have work to do in that particular area.
Absolutely. Nikita, I'm going to ask you that same question, and I'm probably going to position it in a way as now someone that is leading a company, a woman, a Black-owned communications company yourself. Like, what is it that you think is a challenge in the industry that you are trying to help people address?
For me in the tourism industry, it's about like continuing the message of being inclusive. I would say one of the biggest assets I have is, like, as I mentioned in my presentation, is that the tourism industry as a whole gets it. They see the dollar amount that's behind, that's driving people in tourism. And so I have a big team of, you know, colleagues across this industry that I work with that get it. I was talking to another owner of a PR agency in Rochester. And since, you know, like I said, a lot of people, a lot of their decision-making is not always fueled by racism. A lot of it's just ignorance. And one of the things she had shared with me was the fact that, and she's white, she was telling me that before George Floyd, she had never really thought about diversity within her own PR firm. However, having that situation, it sparked the conversation. So she looked at her within her own organization and started trying to diversify her own organization. And even today, like, she has a diverse staff under her, and she continues to promote that. So, I mean, it starts with the conversation. Even no matter how uncomfortable it is, you need to start with the conversation, because that's where it needs to start. Even today, I know some things that we've talked about may feel uncomfortable, but this is where it starts. You have to have the dialogue. I've worked in companies before, like even in news, where it's just, you know, hearing the conversations or seeing the content that's being put out there. It's easier sometimes just to say, okay, all right, I'm just gonna put my head down and keep going. I'm just gonna ignore it. But then when you keep seeing it, for me, I kept seeing it, and it just kept irking my soul. It gets to a point where you have to say something. So that's where I kind of stand on that. You have to speak up and you have to address it.
Yeah, because I was chatting with one of our participants, Dara Harper from the Central New York Community Foundation, and we were just talking about, you know, in some of this work, it's challenging because we know some of the realities, right? In communities that we want to highlight, or in the work that we're doing, there are bias. There are communities that are unwelcoming to folks that look like me. Your example made me think of my own work around study abroad and international experiences. And I had to prepare people that everyone that sees a person of color isn't open, isn't welcoming. There are, as Stephanie pointed out, unconscious bias. There are constructs that exist about who we are and what it is that people think we represent, right? And so how do you keep pushing that? And I think, Aleesha, that's what I found so beautiful about your presentation. I was listening to the words, but what really struck me was the feel and the energy in the photos, and the sentiment behind what you were describing. Like, I felt it in the images that you shared. And so thinking about just the challenge and the barriers and where your work has helped organizations grow, what do you foresee to continue to be a challenge that you are working to address when it comes to inclusive communications right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And thank you. So, just thinking about really quickly going back to background, right? When you think of someone like a Jay-Z or a Beyonce or a Rihanna or Willow, right? Music is universal. Everybody loves music. We're all having a great time. Like, you can kind of spread the love across the board. But then when I start thinking about fashion, when I worked in fashion and how, depending on where the brand was sold, right? Like, how was that communicated? How was it received? And now you get into grooming products. And so what I still see being the case in terms of being a fish swimming upstream is, okay, if you build it, it's not if you build it, they will come, right? Now this product is developed. We're a clean brand. We have over 1,400 ingredients that we don't use, in our products. How are we getting the credit for that? And it has to go beyond just like the big brands making their commitments, like the Targets, et cetera, of the world. But there are also editorial platforms, right? Like, how are you being inclusive with brands like a Scotch Porter? There are also media buying platforms, right? If we're going to play with some of the brands in the space, your lowest media buy can't be $100,000 for young startup brands, right? So like, what level of inventory are you allocating so that BIPOC Black-owned brands are getting visibility to new consumer segments as well, right? And so what to date, I'm currently still experiencing that fish swimming upstream sort of scenario, because even at retail, right, like the multicultural aisle versus everyone else, right? And so there are some retailers that are doing it well, i.e. Target. Their Men's Valley, I don't know if you guys have visited Target, they've expanded those aisles to give the men's aisle sort of like a Sephora-esque experience where he can really see all the products that are offered. Unlike some other retailers where you'll have like the Black-owned brands or the BIPOC brands in a corner here and everything else is on shelf, right? And so having that one-on-one dialogue, sort of breaking down and really bringing to them, instead of waiting for the opportunities, coming to them and say, hey, outside of Black History Month, what's going on with Father's Day? What are you guys doing for Men's Health Month? I'd love to tee up Scotch Porter to be a part of that. Then it makes them think twice about, we should consider Scotch Porter as well. So to Nikita's point, I don't think it's always intentionally, trying to exclude, Black-owned brands, but a lot of times it just isn't second nature. And so I'm really intentional about being an advocate for Scotch Porter, and just providing that access to everyone.
Powerful, powerful point.
Juhanna, I did want to touch on something really quick to go back to the question you had. And you were asking the challenges and tourism. Like I mentioned, it is, for the most part, most tourism professionals see the value, but thinking of one example, there are still some pockets of tourism that don't, or they don't get it. For example, the Alamo down in Texas, they promote the history of the Alamo, the war and everything like that. But one of the questions I was talking to one of the representatives down there about, I was like, so what happened to the African-Americans? Were they involved? What about slavery? How was that involved in this? And she was like, oh, we don't talk about that. And I'm like, why? And it's mostly because it's uncomfortable for them. But these are the conversations, like I said, we do need to have. So there's still work to do in some locations.
Okay, I just have to say, Nikita, thank you for sharing that example. But since I am truly a descendant of Davy Crockett, that's a little tough for me. Just have to tell you.
Yeah.
But I think even just,
but yeah, it's not a source of pride for the family. But in any case,
and the beautiful thing, even about this panel, right? Like us having this conversation, and my phone and the chat here, private comments are coming and rolling in. Thinking even about the intersections of the areas that you all are focusing on, this is just really a powerful conversation, because when I open the panel, and I'm buying time because I'm ready for our audience members to chime in and ask questions or thoughts, or really utilize the time we have left with these brilliant minds. But I think I even opened, like, it's Black History Month, right? And we tried to think of a topic or panel to come to kick off this month's discussion. And one of the things that I said when I opened, like, this is Black History Month, but we shouldn't just be telling or thinking about the relevance of the African American community this month. We shouldn't just be thinking about the Latino community from September 15th to October 15th, right? And Aleesha, your example about the integration of you all's brand in retail stores, not just during Black History Month, but Father's Day, and putting it in the aisle with just men care products all the time, right? Is an example of that. Or the example you're talking about, Nikita, with the Alamo and what's, traveling in the stories, even here in Central New York, I think all the time, we have such a deep history with challenging this notion of race and equity and what democracy really looks like. And I'm like, how come we don't advertise that? Like, Harriet Tubman is buried 25 minutes from Syracuse, right? Like, how are we telling those stories? I'm going to ask, I see some questions here in the chat. I'm just going to call attention to them, but we're also open if you want to come off of mute and ask your question of a panelist or to all of them, you're welcome to do that. But Suzanne asked, are there any resources you would recommend to learn more about ensuring job ads are inclusive? And I'll just leave it there, terminology to be used or be sure to avoid. Stephanie, I see you came off, so go ahead.
Sure, I was just going to say, I'm sure there are some specific resources around in this particular area, and I'm happy to take that offline with you, and we can talk about it. I think that there's some specific things that we always include in our job listings about that we have an affirmative action policy, an equal opportunity employer. I think when it comes to job descriptions, that's a really interesting piece, because I think inclusivity from there also talks about different lifestyles, family scenarios, right? Feeling inclusive to people who have people in their lives with that require special attention, right? So flexibility and some of those things that I think lend itself really nicely to recognizing like, oh, okay, these people might help me put my family first, right? Or the needs that I have, so I think that inclusivity, I think you got to think about all of the various aspects of what that means. But as far as language in particular, I'm happy to take that offline, and I'll put my email in the chat, so we can talk about that. But certainly welcome if Aleesha or Nikita have any other thoughts on that.
I'd love to jump in really quickly. I think it's also important to, once you put those breadcrumbs out there, like the job ad, right? When that person goes and does their research, right? Like, what does your team page look like? If it's only key, white leadership as the hierarchy from a team membership perspective, if a person of color isn't within that suite, that's fine, because that might just be the case at that time, but maybe spotlight some other key, like, team members down below, because it also is too, like, the ad is inclusive, but then when I go to the website, I don't feel included. And so just making sure that from a 360 standpoint, you're really communicating inclusivity.
It's a great point.
And that is a great point. I mean, just like to Aleesha's point about, showing the inclusivity on your website, even just picking a daycare for my twins. I remember going online, looking at their web pages and looking at their Facebook pages, and some of it, based on, I love the schools that I was looking at, but at the same time, I was looking to see how diverse they were. Were my kids going to be the only ones? Were they going to have other kids of other, backgrorounds? And that played a big decision, because one school had nothing, and I was like, oh, okay, we're not going there, because it's not that it's not that they don't want them there. It's just that they don't. Really, I don't know. But it does play a big role in my decision making on those fronts.
I think that's important. Stephanie, the work of also of our economic inclusion team, I see Megan Dorso on there, that conversation about employment, right? It's not just about putting out the job description, but also thinking about how you're representing this notion of diversity within your organization is really, really important. We've got more questions coming in, but another question that was asked was, in an organization or working with a group of people, how do you ensure that folks feel comfortable reporting on issues when things aren't going right, but maybe communicating to management and staff about incidents or reports when something goes awry or goes wrong? How do you keep the door open. Do you all, anyone have any advice on that? That's all. What I will say in regards to that question, when I saw it, I was like, oh, tough one, because it's more important, almost like I think Nikita said when she's looking for childcare for her kids. It's one thing to say you're inclusive or put a statement out there, but how is it that you're demonstrating that you're committed to these issues so that folks know? You can't just say, you know, we want to be, we're open to it, but how are your actions and behaviors demonstrating it? That's my point. Stephanie, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I noticed, I mean, I don't want to put her on the spot, but to me, some of the questions feel a little bit kind of human resources related. And I noticed that Monifa was in the audience, so I didn't know if she might want to jump in here. I'm not sure if she still is, so she was earlier, so whether or not she might want to jump in just from an HR perspective on that.
I'm still here. So I didn't jump in because I wasn't part of the panel, and enjoyed listening to the perspective of others. But from an HR perspective, when it comes to being inclusive and showing that inclusivity, it is, as each of you have said, a move and something we have to do intentionally. When making the environment feel welcome, it is something that we have to intentionally say and put out there. We have to not only say it, but prove so in our actions when one comes to us. If someone comes to us with an issue or concern, make sure that they don't feel like they are the ones being reprimanded, but being supported in whatever is happening to them. Making sure that they understand that even though if we don't look like them or don't sound like them or don't act like them or haven't experienced the same experience that they have, that we validate their feelings. It is important to say, and not only say, but show that we hear them, even if we don't fully and personally understand what they're going through.
I think
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Aleesha, go ahead.
I was just going to jump out there and say this too. Just, listen, in the spirit of transparency, right? We've said it a couple of times, it's uncomfortable. And the reality is, even being a part of the group that needs to be considered for inclusivity to happen also doesn't feel great as well, right? So I can understand on both sides of the coin how the groups who need to consider inclusivity and the groups that need to be included, it's tough on both sides of the coin. And that's why these conversations are necessary, right? And I think not for nothing, it's about us all coming together and figuring out like, okay, what is the crawl, walk, run approach? So I think, Stephanie, her organization seems to have made great strides. And like she said, listen, there are some things that we need to be more deliberate about. And so what I would hope is that we all feel empowered to start our journey of inclusivity and diversity when we, once we leave this call and know that Rome wasn't built in a day, right? It's really about speaking not only within amongst ourselves, but also internally in our own organizations and figuring out like, hey, what is our level 1, level 2, and how do we by next year be on our 4.0 version of our diversity and inclusion plan?
Right. Great question. One of the other questions that was in the chat, and everybody, that was Monifa Wilcox. She is my colleague also here at CenterState. And I think, Stephanie, that's a good example of when you necessarily don't know the answer. And I think you said this in your presentation, call on someone who does. So that was a great action to demonstrate what to do if you don't know. The other question that I saw in the group was from Dawn. How would you go about building an advisory group to help with the marketing and advertising and ensuring that it's more diverse and appropriate? And how would you frame an ask around inviting people to do this? Right, I'm imagining if you say advisory group, you're looking for volunteers, and she wanted to highlight, she doesn't just want to just go to alumni, but she wants a representative group from the whole quote community. And so any advice there?
Well, I can give you the perspective from our work in doing this, right? So we started working through this and actually, interestingly, calling on a couple, because obviously we have a strong relationship with Syracuse University, but we reached out to some colleagues through a variety of different organizations. So through people who work in work in PR and represent that from a journalism perspective, because we felt like there would be a lot of strength there, representing Black Americans. We also have called upon some folks in nonprofit organizations and some of the other markets that we're in to represent people with disabilities, same sex, different gender identities. So we've done that by really leveraging some nonprofits as well as some advocacy organizations. And again, some professors, and just because of the connections that we have in a variety of different areas. I would say in this particular community, and just looking at some of the people that are on this group and even participating in this call, I mean, Nikita is a wonderful representative in this community. Dr. Rogers brings so much to the table, because clearly I don't have a problem calling people out who are on the call. Nan Eaton from United Way has resources in the nonprofit world that can bring to you organizations that are working with people with disabilities, people with autism, as well as, you know, Hugo Acosta is on, who owns CNY Latino. Hugo and I have been friends for years. We call on each other very often to partner on a variety of things. So I think it's just looking at those resources. And I would say reaching out to Ms. Shea through UMIA would also be a great resource. So I think there are a lot of things that CenterState brings to the table and organizations. And if you called out to Dr. Rogers or called out to Ms. Shea and said, hey, I really need some help and we want to pull this together, how can we do that? But I think it's looking at all the different aspects of diversity and bringing people from different community groups. So that's how we've done that. It has been a volunteer situation, but we have provided some incentives for participation through like travel expense and some of those kind of things. So that's how we've approached it. Every organization may be different in how they want to and are able to handle that. But I would say there's a lot of phenomenal marketing professionals in this community that represent a lot of different audiences that could be brought to the table. So
I'm gonna add later on to that question. Tamisha asked, oftentimes inclusivity is applied to race and ethnicity. Can the panel also speak to the importance of including or broadening that definition to the LGBTQ, people with disabilities, veterans, indigenous populations? How could we talk about broadening the field or making sure we include those populations as well?
Sure. Diversity does include more than just race. It is about disabilities. It is about same-sex, heterosexual, you know, bisexual, whatever, and LGBTQ. And one of the things from the tourism aspect, I know when I was at Visit Syracuse, that was like a big, you know, one of the diversified avenues that we would reach out to the medium. We would, some of the things we would do is, you know, we would get in touch with the local LGBTQ community that I would work closely with, and to see what was going on, to get a beat or what was happening in our community, so it'd be easier to promote out there. I used to attend the LGBT Expo in New York City, and in speaking with them, just like everyone else, they felt they wanted to be included. They wanted to see any type of promotional material that was inviting and inclusive for them, because they would tell me, hey, we have lots of money to spend and we will spend it where we see that we're welcome, because just like everyone else, they don't want to go someplace that could be potentially dangerous for them to travel. They actually love to travel and they have lots of money to spend. So that's a market that New York State, not just Syracuse, but all the different counties throughout New York State has focused on as well.
This is, I think, going a layer deeper. Now all the questions are coming in and we got 3 minutes, but I'll ask Aleesha this question, but I'd be interested to see other folks' responses. Someone asked that talking about health issues is a challenge in the African-American community for sure. And so how do you create campaigns or initiatives that have a more intimate feel, I'm imagining, especially if you're talking with communities of a certain age demographic. And so basically, how do we still utilize, is the role of traditional media still valuable? For example, do you think there's still a place for direct mail in marketing and communications today?
Yeah, I'll jump in fairly quickly. So, you know, at Scotch Porter, especially because we are focused on wellness, right, and that internal/external grooming, we launch what we call our SP Wellness Moments, where we have IG Lives with different experts who come in and speak about financial wellness, spirituality, sexual health, which especially amongst that 25 to 44-year-old age group, as an example, you know, erectile dysfunction, things like that are really top of mind for this consumer. And so we have decided to be intentional about pulling back the layers and putting that stuff front facing, not only to educate him, but to make him feel seen, right? And so when you're sharing in that communal moment, a lot of times folks are open to the conversations, right? Whether it's addressing it from the standpoint of being that person or knowing someone. And so just including those conversations where applicable in your brand or your strategy, having a fireside chat, you know, having a focus group, you know, having a Zoom call, you know, everybody's raised their hand and say, hey, I want to learn more about this topic, or I want to engage, can make individuals feel more comfortable, right? At the end of the day, you can still be a vessel to bring these conversations forward, even if you're not selling, you know, erectile dysfunction medication, right? It's still about supporting his lifestyle and his total wellness. So at Scotch Porter, that's how we're doing, invested in content creation, speaking about plant-based eating, things like that, to really help round out what his wellness perspective looks like.
Yeah. I think the other thing I will add on to that, because so many of the examples of the work that happens, whether we go back to the question that was asked about broadening the conversation, one, when we talk about equity and representation in communications, right, we're talking about all people. And I think Stephanie's point about making sure we're using people first in the description later in the language is important. I think thinking about data-driven decisions. So as Nikita provided examples of how she's using data to think about tourism, I didn't know much about the revenue generation from Asian communities and travel. And I've done a lot of research around travel and the impact of international communities on audiences, to thinking about the founder's story for Scotch Porter, right? In coming through his community, seeing the gap, understanding the historic legacy of grooming and care that has played a role in the African-American community. He used that to launch what is now becoming a global brand, right? And so in each of these stories, there's an intimate start. And I think what we have to continue to do, whether you want to do more marketing to the African-American or Indigenous, the LGBT, the veteran community, I think there is a space and a place for grassroots strategy, because I think these are communities that often have been excluded. And so you can't just start at the top, you have to build relationships, right? You have to form a group that trusts you, and you have to do that work to develop a trust and relationship with the groups that have been historically excluded, whether you're providing a service, a product, an opportunity. Don't just make the assumption that folks are ready to launch in if you don't have a long-standing history with them. So we challenge you to do that work. If we could be of help and support here at CenterState, please do not hold a second thought to reaching out. Stephanie, Aleesha, Nikita, thank you so much. If you have more questions or want to connect with our panelists, please reach out to us and we will try to do our best to keep the conversation going. This probably won't be the last time this conversation comes up. Thank you so much, ladies, for your talent, the work that you're doing, not just showing up today, but just the work you're doing to move this conversation in our communities forward. We want to thank Berkshire Bank for their support. If you enjoyed today's conversation, come back March 17th. We're going to be talking about advancing female leaders, the power of mentorship. We have a dynamic panel set up for that as well. And we look forward to being in community with you and moving DEI, racial equity, and social impact work forward. thank you so much for your time, attention, and engagement this morning. And we will see you hopefully on March 17th.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.